Good afternoon, students. We're going to go once again into our study back into the problem of pain with C.S. Lewis. We are still in the introduction, our second class here in our study on theodicy. Now, theodicy comes from two Greek words, theos meaning God and dikeo, righteousness. And this has been the subject of centuries of debate. Why would a righteous God allow evil in the world? And so C.S. Lewis, in his layman's terms, now, as you remember, I told you about this. He was a professor of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge University. So we're not talking about somebody who is just wandering along with no education and giving his thoughts. This is after much study and personal pain. You know, we all have that. We all go through things. I just think about it right now, even in my limited sense. I had a severe injury years back whenever we had been out at our other house. I had been running through the dark thinking that one of my children had fallen off the deck. And in the dark, I sprinted outside in slippers. And in running around the side, I was in a full run and kicked a boulder, one of those ornamental boulders that you have in the ground. And it was just, I want you to think about taking a full run and kicking the side of a brick house. I smashed my toe, and I've been have problems for better than 15 years on that, even in just walking, a severe pain. Then I just finished up. I don't know if I told some of you about it. I just finished up with a severe case of poison ivy just this summer. We have problems with some of our relatives that are in their declining years, and so we're pretty much taking care of them right now and at the ready at any time. And so that's a real concern for both parts of the couple in counseling them, and just, you know, different things that will happen within our life that are either challenges or difficulties or sicknesses, problems. We all do. I don't give these to you just to let you try to compare to you or have it some sort of a spitting contest, but to let you know, we also deal with things. Cars break down, there's a hole in the roof, a leaky roof, or something doesn't come in that you needed to, financially, or a bill comes in that you didn't want and causes financially. The deck needs repair. A bedroom has a need, a broken window in the bedroom, or something else that doesn't come along that you desperately need. We have all sorts of problems there, and they're very painful. And of course, most of all is the loss of a loved one. So C.S. Lewis, as I told you, lost his wife. They had only been married a handful of years when she succumbed to cancer, and he watched her die. It was a lingering cancer that took quite a while, and yet she succumbed to that. And his grief was very, very deep. He wrote a number of books, one called A Grief Observed, and this one as well. So we're going to go back and we're going to talk about this in a man who admittedly says in the very opening pages, I am very limited in this, and I suffered through these things and probably not have come through as a strong Christian. And yet I'll give you my observations. And it's been considered a very, very powerful work that I think is very good for you as a Christian leader to know. So let's go back into it. And let's go into, we're on page 16 of the book, The Problem of Pain. And let's discuss it and write our notes down so that we might be able to reach others who are suffering. There are people all around you that could use some counseling, both within the scripture and then within why would God allow this. So let's continue on this. Now you're saying, well, I'm not seeing a lot of scripture in there. We will come into some scripture as we talk about it along with this. But right now, we're going to be looking at his observation. Now, the first thing that I want you to see is manuscript-wise, age-wise, on the age of the books. Job is the first book of the Bible, if you think about it, by the age of the manuscripts. And so what's the subject? Well, why is there pain? Why does God allow pain? So the very first book we see technically is really what is this whole all about? Why is this existence filled with so much pain? So as we talk about that, we see that virtually none of the Bible characters that we read about throughout the scriptures are without a time of suffering and pain and disappointment. Think of Jeremiah. Think of the book of Lamentations that Jeremiah writes. Nothing but crying and disappointment. Elijah at the top of victory, then being told, well, you're going to die, and he just withdraws, becomes almost suicidal in his thoughts. We talk about many people that suffer from these things. In all developed religion, we find three strands or elements, and in Christianity, one more. The first of those, let's go back and let's talk about that. Remember this? The numinous, the numinous. We talked about that. Under theodicy, we said numinous. When we said it might be an awe, it's something that is beyond us, out of this physical realm. Nothing is more certain than that man, from the very early period, began to believe that the universe was haunted by spirits, says Mr. Lewis. Professor Otto perhaps assumed too easily that from the very first, such spirits were regarded with numinous awe. That is impossible to prove, for the very good reason that utterances expressing awe of the numinous, remember, that's more of the spiritual, the term numinous, and utterances expressing mere fear of danger may use identical language. We can still say that we are afraid of a ghost or afraid of a rise in prices. It's therefore theoretically possible that there was a time when men regarded these spirits simply as dangerous and felt toward them as they feel towards tigers. What is certain is that now, at any rate, the numinous experience exists, and that if we start from ourselves, we can trace it to a long way back. Modern example might be found, and if we're not too proud to seek it here, in this children's book, The Wind in the Willows, where Rat and Mole approach Pan on the island. Rat, he found breath to whisper, shaking, "Are you afraid?" "Afraid?" murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. "Afraid of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh Mole, I am afraid." So when they find someone so much bigger than them in the spiritual realm, they are afraid and yet not. Going back about a century, we find copious examples in the writer Wordsworth, perhaps the finest being that passage in the first book of the Prelude, where he describes his experience while rowing on the lake in a stolen boat. Going back further, we get a very pure and strong example in Malory, when Galahad began to tremble right hard when the deadly mortal flesh began to behold the spiritual things. That's what he would call the numinous. When you start standing in the realm of the supernatural, even if it's in literature, you'll see many times in fictional literature, they talk about something is very, very scary there because we can't handle it. At the beginning of our era, it finds expressions in the Apocalypse, which would be the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, where one writer, John, fell at the feet of the risen Christ as one dead. Now you go over to pagan literature, because all of mankind realizes the numinous is very scary. In pagan literature, we find Ovid's picture of the dark grove on the Aventine, of which you would say at a glance, numen inest, the place is haunted. Or there is a presence, capital P here, and Virgil gives us the palace of Latinus. He says, awful with woods and sanctity of elder days. A Greek fragment attributed, but improbably to Aeschylus, tells us of the earth, sea, and mountain shaking beneath the dread eye of their master. And far further back, Ezekiel in the Bible tells us of the rings in his theophany, which is the picture of God in the Old Testament, so that they were so high they were dreadful. And Jacob rising from sleep saying, how dreadful is this place. We don't know how far back in human history this feeling goes. The earliest men almost certainly believed in things which would excite the feeling in us if we believed in them. And it seems therefore probable that numinous awe is as old as humanity itself. But our main concern is not with its dates. The important thing is that somehow or other it's come into existence and is widespread and does not disappear from the mind with the growth of knowledge and civilization. We've always been afraid and in awe of the numinous, is what he's saying. Now, this awe is not the result of an inference from the visible universe. There is no possibility of arguing from mere danger to the uncanny, still less to the fully numinous. You may say that it seems to you very natural that early man, being surrounded by real dangers and therefore frightened, should invent the uncanny and the numinous. In a sense it is, but let us understand what we mean. You feel it to be natural because, sharing human nature with your remote ancestors, you can imagine yourself reacting to perilous solitudes in the same way. And this reaction is indeed natural in the sense of being in accord with human nature. But it is not in the least natural in the sense that the idea of the uncanny or the numinous is already contained in the idea of the dangerous, or that any perception of danger, any dislike of the wounds and death which it may tell, could give the slightest conception of ghostly dread or numinous awe to an intelligence which did not already understand them. When man passes from physical fear to dread and awe, he makes a sheer jump and apprehends something which could never be given as danger is by the physical facts and logical deductions from them. Most attempts to explain the numinous presuppose the thing to be explained, as when anthropologists derive it from fear of the dead without explaining why dead men, assuredly the least dangerous kind of men, should have attracted this peculiar feeling. You ever hear of people that are very afraid of dead bodies? Well, a dead body can't attack you, and yet there's something about the life spirit being out of them. It scares people very, very deeply. It's a very fearful thing. That's what he's saying here. Against all such attempts, we must insist that dread and awe are in a different dimension from fear. They are in the nature of an interpretation man gives to the universe or an impression he gets from it. And just as no enumeration of the physical qualities of a beautiful object could ever include its beauty or give the faintest hint as to what we mean by beauty to a creature without aesthetic experience or knowledge of beauty, in that with aesthetic experience, so no factual description of any human environment could include the uncanny and the numinous or even hint at them. There seem, in fact, to be only two views we can hold about awe. Now I'm talking about AWE, awe. Either it is a mere twist in the human mind corresponding to nothing objective and serving no biological function, yet showing no tendency to disappear from that mind at its fullest development in poet, philosopher, or saint. Or else it is a direct experience of the really supernatural, to which the name revelation might properly be given. The numinous is not the same as the morally good, and a man overwhelmed with awe is likely, if left to himself, to think that the numinous object beyond good and evil. This brings us to the second strand or element in religion. All the human beings that history has heard of acknowledge some kind of morality. That is, they feel towards certain proposed actions the experience expressed by the words I ought or I ought not. Now, I'll stop there, because what we're doing is we're stepping into a realm of things that man can't explain in the physical world. Why would men be afraid of something that would be supernatural or beyond the physical realm? Afraid. Well, is it a fear like I'm afraid I'll fall or lose $1,000? It's a fear of something much beyond that. So we'll talk some more about that later, and we'll go to our third part of the introduction in C.S. Lewis' Problem of Pain.